Madam Chairman,
Yes, sir.
this is not a State of the Agency address, although sometimes I think maybe that would be a good thing for us to do at some point in the future. I know the governor's about to do the same thing and follow in suit to kind of give you an idea of where I think we are and where we may be going. And some of these things we have talked about in the past. There's a couple that I thought we wanted to revisit today, and I want to make a few comments before I tag team with Chris and or Barry. Barry also has talked with you in the past with some of the details about different changes that we might look at in licensing and how some of the federal legislation is changing that and all those kind of things. So depending on the discussion today and how in depth, that will certainly be your call as to where we go with that. But let me just mention a couple of things. There's really two concerns that I want to bring before you today. One being a change in the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and how they're counting our number of licenses sold. And for those who may not be really familiar with what that impact could be, let me back up just for a second and tell you that about 35% of our budget comes from federal revenue, and that revenue is from, for the most part, those places where special excise taxes are collected on hunting, fishing, boating equipment, and then put into a trust fund and then given back to the states based on the number of licenses and boats registered and so forth. So any change that impacts how many of those licenses or how many of those boats or any of those other things in terms of numbers has a great impact on what kind of revenue picture we have as it impacts that 35% of our total budget. So the other thing that I would like to talk about just a little bit in a second is some of the things we do in providing programs for users who as a group don't really contribute financially to those programs. Individually, some of them certainly do by their willingness to participate where they aren't really having a burden to do that at this point or any legislative way that mandates that they do it, but because they want to contribute to the programs and the well-being, then they get involved. But I want to talk about pretty much those things in a group. First of all, let me just say that the details a little bit on the change in the license certification. My greatest concern at this particular point is one that we would categorize as our senior citizens license, the permanent senior citizens license. The senior citizen license, it stands now when a person reaches 65 years of age, they can purchase a permanent senior citizens license, which is good for the rest of their life, and that license costs $10, and it essentially equates to anything that doesn't require a permit. It has, it includes your trout stamp, your big game license, your regular hunting fishing license, and all of those. But this is where I'd like to go back and ask Chris, because I think the legislative history of how we got to this license is important for you to know, because some of the parameters and some of the thinking and what we may have to do going forward is kind of going to depend on, I think, how we got from no license to a beginning of a senior citizen's license to where we are now. So.
Thank you, Director Carter.
Thank you, Director. As Director alluded to, the current status of the permanent senior citizens license, it is codified in TCA 72-201. And in that code section, it says that residents who are 65 years of age or older prior to March 1 don't need a license. They can hunt. March 1, 1991, excuse me. Any residents of Tennessee who turn 65 after March 1, 1991 can buy the $10 permanent license. That is the current state of the law, and that has been the law since 1990. Looking back at the legislative history, prior to 1989, no senior citizen's license existed in Tennessee. If you were over the age of 65, you did not need a license to hunt in this state. All you needed was your ID, and you were good to go. In 1989, the legislature came in and amended 72-201 and created an annual senior citizen's license. The annual senior citizen's license provided that any resident who was 65 prior to March 1, 1990 would be grandfathered in, continue under the old system, but any residents turning 65 after March 1, 1990 would be required to purchase an annual license. That annual license would cost them $5. The annual license that they purchased at the cost of $5 a year gave them the same privileges as our current permanent senior citizens license do. The voting record on that bill in 1989, the Senate passed that bill 24-2, and the House passed that bill 75-20. Now, there was a number of things included in that bill, so it's impossible to really determine what the dissenting votes were due to, what the affirmative votes were due to. However, apparently the 1989 system that they put in place was not that popular, because in 1990 the legislature revisited the issue. And in 1990 the legislature abolished the annual senior citizens license, and they created the current system that we have now with the permanent senior citizen license upon the one-time payment of $10. That, the way it is now, has been in effect since 1990. In 1990, that legislation passed the Senate 29-0 and passed the House 98-0. So whatever went on in 1989 after the change to an annual senior citizens license, it caused the legislature to come back the very next year, reverse their thinking, and go forward with unanimously with what we have now.
Chris, can I just do a quick recap to make sure I understand the course of events? There was, beyond proof of identity and age, no restriction on senior hunting prior to 1989.
Correct. Any resident of Tennessee who was 65 or older did not have to have any type of hunting license to hunt in this state prior to 1989.
And then in 89, an annual license was statutorily approved?
Statutorily created and approved. They grandfathered those residents who were already 65. The annual license came into effect in 89.
And then in 1990, that was repealed, and the permanent lifetime, essentially, senior license was put in place unanimously.
Correct.
It's helpful. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Did all of our lifetime license, were they developed in 1990?
No, they weren't. The lifetime sportsman's license, and I've done some research on that. I don't have it in front of me here, but they came later. I want to say 98 to somewhere in 98, 99, 2000, somewhere in that general range.
Do we have any information from other states that have maybe dealt with a situation like this to know how they handled it? Or are we the first to?
I would say that all of the states that have senior type license, that would be a question that Barry and or Director Carter could probably answer better as far as comparison. But my understanding is the changes that the feds have done are impacting more than just Tennessee right now, and there's not really the change hasn't happened before, so we don't know, kind of what we're facing going forward.
Great. Chris, I really appreciate that. And for members of the commission, I thought it was very important, as sometimes there's a foundation in knowledge that we really understand our history, so that we can best inform the future. And we, certainly to the solutions process, that certainly seems as it's a budget committee issue, but I think it's very, very important to understand the legislative history on these matters. And if I would also ask for any members who ask questions, if you turn on your microphones, just so we can all hear you, and that can be in the record, would be very, very helpful as well. And does anybody have any questions on the legislative history for Chris or for Director Carter?
I do.
Yes, sir. Commissioner Cox.
What year did the federal match begin?
1935. Oh, excuse me. The PR program began then. You're talking about the match for the senior citizen license?
Well, for all licenses.
Yeah, 1935.
Okay.
So
So when it was created, we created a new income stream for the federal match for the agency in 1990 or 89 or whenever it was.
As it related to senior citizens, yes, sir.
Right.
So did I understand it right up to that point, though? There was no license at all after 65, so we had no federal matching?
Exactly, and that's why the change came about. At one time, for years during my career, a person just had to show some form of identification with an age on it, and if they met the 65 or over, then they required no license. You could hunt on a driver's license or any identification you had that showed proof of age. And then the thinking became, we're really missing out on a significant amount of federal funding, because if the license was purchased, you can't give a license away and collect federal funding. So if you purchase a license, then you get to collect for each one of those licenses federal funds. So without in those incremental steps of changes, that's eventually where we got to, so that we could collect federal funding, and it went to the point that that $10 license then became in perpetuity. So you bought it one time and it was good for the rest of your life. And if I can pick back up there for a second, just to continue on with a little bit of history, not necessarily legislative history, but how this thing came about. When we first put that program into place, it was based on actuarial tables where we would look, okay, a person's 65, they're projected to live X number of years. The Fish and Wildlife Service said, okay, it's okay, you can count that license for those number of years that that person was there, and you can count that for federal aid reimbursement each year. So this is the double impact of where we are on this. Just to be clear, we still can count the year in which the license is sold and receive federal aid for that 1 year. But for those years, for all those persons from the time it was created until now, the big change is that the Fish and Wildlife Service says under our rules, which they instituted in 2011, you not only can't count those people except for the 1 year, you also we're making this retroactive, and you can't count those that's in your system already. To fast forward, that meant that we lost $1 million on our wildlife side and $1 million on our boating side, on our fishing side, for an impact of about $2 million because of those licenses we could not count. So
Is that 1 year, or is that since the retroactive?
that's what it would cost us essentially every year, correctly? So that's a deficit of about $2 million each year forever that we will never get back unless we have some way to get this repealed or some way to get a different ruling. So I just wanted you to know some of the things that we had been through in order to try to do that. We first began, and someone asked a question a minute ago how it was impacting other states, Commissioner Rice, I guess. It really didn't come out, like I said, in 2011, so the first time it was really mentioned was, okay, in your 2011-2012 certification, here's the rules you're going to have to play by. And we went, wait a minute, that's not good. We were maybe the first state that was audited at that point. We were certainly in the first three. And when they began looking at that, that's when we first had an idea that this was really going to change how we'd done it in the past. I can understand a rule change where from his point forward, this is the way we're going to do things, but when you make it retroactive, it has really devastating effects. So we, in the audit, when the Fish and Wildlife Service auditors were there, we said, we disagree. I'm obviously very much summarizing this. But we disagree with this. We don't think it's right. We want to appeal it. So auditors did their thing. They said, nope, that's the way it is. So then we put in writing. We wrote to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in Washington and said, we don't like this. We want to change it, and here's the reasons why. We got back at things saying, no, we don't think that's the way it can go. I went from there and appealed to the U.S. To the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies, which is, all the agencies in the United States that have wildlife programs, and they work directly with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And because I'm on the executive committee of that group, I got to do a little bit more and work directly with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and Director Ash and the people who do their federal funding. So we didn't get anywhere there either. So I said I'm making things short, but we never got there. We've appealed on every step that we could. During the Archery Trades Association, the person who handles all the federal aid funding out of Washington, D.C. was in Nashville. So we went out to supper together, and I laid out for him what I thought was really bad. Two things. One, that we had no time to go back in and make any legislative change that would be necessary to change this licensing structure. The other is the fact that it was retroactive, that it made such a dent in our budget that it was going to be really a struggle. I said, I can't tell you where this is going, but where I think will happen is that our commission is going to push back in whatever way they can, and they're going to probably push back to our legislative. I was just guessing. If they made any kind of forward move, they'd probably work with our legislators in the state to see what kind of avenues were open to try to change this on the federal level. And that's where we are now. So I want you to know we've been through 4 different appeal processes and haven't gotten very far. So, and if I can go forward just one more thing on that, we don't know yet where our permanent regular lifetime license is going to be. If you use the same analysis that was put together when they told us we couldn't do this one, roughly speaking, we could get into really details here, but roughly speaking, the license that we charge $10 now, if you think that, and I'm just throwing this out for a 10-year time period, if a person at 65 bought that and you said, well, we're going to be able to count it for 10 years, the license would have to cost a minimum of $224. Well, to do that, nobody's going to buy a $224 license for that when they could buy a $28 license each year individually. So in any case, they're talking about maybe applying that same rationale to the permanent lifetime license, not just the senior license, but the permanent one we have. There's two problems with that. One, obviously, is if they make that retroactive, we have a number of people that we've sold permanent licenses to that will no longer be able to count, and we'll take that hit as well each year. And going forward, if you apply the same rationale, a permanent lifetime license would cost thousands of dollars to buy. And again, would be kind of a moot point. Nobody would buy it. So those are the things that we're looking at and trying to struggle with. That one, we don't know exactly where it's going to go, but I know that South Carolina, West Virginia, and Tennessee are all in the same boat on the senior citizen license. The last little bit of appeal that we've got, there is a committee that's made up of states and the Fish and Wildlife Service, people who deal with nothing but federal aid. They met in Louisiana right after the first of the year. They asked for a person from those states affected to be a member of that committee going forward. And Barry Sumner's our assistant director for our staff operations on the financial side of the house, has been appointed to be our representative on that. And Barry has handled federal aid for the state of Tennessee in our agency for 14 years now, so he knows that thing really well, and I'm very pleased that he's going to be there. So this is our last ditch effort. Those states that are on the committee with the Fish and Wildlife Service are trying to reach some kind of compromise to see where we can go from there. So I know that was a long rambling dissertation, but I just wanted you to know all the parameters that we've been through to try to correct this in-house and working with the different agencies. And I have one other thing to bring up, but I don't want. That's all I have on the senior citizen and the permanent license.
Great. Well, thank you, Director Carter. And as I'm thinking about this, and this is the committee time, we obviously will have full commission time tomorrow, but I think that it is very important that we exhaust all options. And I would push back. I don't think that was a long rambling dissertation. I thought that was very, very helpful for me to understand the intense work that the agency and you have led to work with the U.S. Department to try to find some resolution within those appropriate protocols, and I appreciate that. It sounds like there is a current process ongoing that is not fully resolved itself. Having said that, based on the fiscal impact for the agency, I think it's important for us to seek assistance from both our state and federal legislative delegations. And so I would love to just sort of, for idea purposes, see what the members of the Government Relations Committee might think about this. And I'd love your feedback, Director Carter, because you and I have not talked in detail about this. So I certainly would want as much discussion as is necessary. But I think it would be very important to direct the agency, and Chris particularly, for the commission to write a letter to our leadership at the state level and the leadership at the congressional level to articulate the current state of play on this issue and what the facts are, and that this is a potential burden on seniors. It is a potential burden on the agency to accomplish our mission, and that they would advocate through resolutions to grandfather the state of Tennessee under this at a minimum. We can certainly think of other solutions, but I think to put Tennessee back in the position that we have been in, certainly the retroactivity has been a very painful consequence, and I think moving forward it will be. So I think at a minimum that should be our request. And given the federal leadership of Senator Alexander and the delegation, given the desire for members of the state legislative leadership, I think that's a reasonable request, and I would love to see what action might come from that given the time period we're in, and particularly its legislative session, and it's certainly right to do that. And so that is an idea that I would love for the members of the Government Relations Committee or anyone else to give feedback on, and particularly Director Carter as well.
I guess I could start. Ordinarily, the states are pretty unified in the things that they do when it comes to some kind of unification of ideas. This one's a little different because it involves money, and you've seen what money does to any number of institutions and families and everything else when everybody's squabbling for the same little bit. I don't expect that we'll get, go get them Tennessee from a lot of the states who will benefit if we don't get resolution, because there's a little bit more money that goes into the pot that they'll get to divide. So I think we will be able to work with them and come to some kind of reasonable, and they are always reasonable with us, even though they don't always like the end result. But I just throw that out to say that it won't be 100% of the states, because not all of them have permanent senior citizen licenses. Some that have different funding scenarios, our neighbor across the river, Missouri, they give theirs away, but they have a whole totally different funding structure than we do. And so it really varies by the states, but I think we have a good argument. One of the things that is looming out there, and I'll just throw this out, there are some states that specifically pick us out because we still have we're one of the only states that still have a combination hunting fishing license. So as we count our licenses, when we sell a license, we count that person as a hunter, we count them as a fisherman in terms of federal aid. Those states that have individual licenses don't like that because they feel like that because of their system, they don't get as much federal aid back. So I just throw that to tell you that I think that what you laid out is our only course of action left, at least the one that if this committee from the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies can't iron it out, I think that's a very reasonable approach.
Any comments from members of the commission? Chairman McMillan?
Director Carter, I know you said that on the $10 senior license that they recognized that for 1 year. So is it your perception then if we decided to charge a $10 fee for each year after that, would they recognize that so that we get our federal aid?
As long as there's a license sale each year, they would recognize it.
Well, I mean, I understand that we're not going to debate that now, but I'm just saying that $10 buys 3 gallons of gas. If we properly explain to the public why we need to do this, do you really think that the people that are getting close to my age that are moving to that point, do you not think that if we explain it properly, do you really think that as long as we grandfather those that already bought the original $10 license, do you really think that that's going to be an issue for $10 if that's what it takes to keep us from losing $1 million?
Boy, that's a heck of a question. Over the years, I'll just tell you that the sportsmen, when we have asked for a license increase, I can't think of a time that it wasn't supported. We'd make the case on why we needed things, but at the same time, when you've had something for a while that was either no cost to you, which going forward after that first time is no cost after that, there's a psychological part that kicks in that I'm not sure how that would fall out. So wish I could give you a better answer.
And Mr. Chairman, I might add, I think 1989 is probably the proof point on what the reaction might be when the legislature imposes an increase to seniors when one did not exist before. It was repealed and something far lower was put in its place. So at least we have on Tennessee history one example of such a severe reaction that within 365 days there was another action by the members of the General Assembly.
But it's still my personal opinion that if we properly address why we need $10 per person that's reached 65, I just can't believe the public is not receptive to that. I mean, that's just my personal opinion.
Yes, sir. Commissioner Cox and then Commissioner Stout.
Barry, the actuarial tables have obviously changed in 25 years since this was established. Do you have any, what would be the date today if you use the same standard? What would be the age?
Well, we use actuarial tables, but we do it year by year. Person buys a license when they're 65, then we're basically following them through the years, killing off a few of those people each year. Same thing if they wait until they're 75 and buy the license, you know, that cohort, that group is gonna be killed off sooner. But, I guess to answer your question, the average age right now is, I think on the tables that I use, which come from the federal government, I think 79. And that's up, you know, it goes up a year or so every few years.
So that would equate to a 1989 65-year-old. Now you would be 79.
Yeah, I'm not sure I followed that, but.
If we were establishing a senior license based on the same data or the same rules that they established it in 1989, what would that age be today? Instead of 65, would it be 79, 75, 72?
Oh, I don't think I can tell you that.
And I don't know that that date was set based on actuarial tables. I don't know that the legislative history would reflect that necessarily.
Well, one of the other options is just move the date. Instead of 65, make it 70 or 72 or something to have the license kick in. Then you just.
I think at the time, and my memory's not the greatest, but I think 65 was probably selected because at that time that's when a person was eligible for full Social Security, and that was 65 was kind of that magic number. Since that time, 65, as you well know, is no longer that date. It has moved up, and persons who are younger, just now getting into the workforce, their 65 has now gone to 67, 68, 69. So that has climbed. If in relation to what you just asked, the number of years, the life expectancy for people has also increased. And so I don't know what those actual numbers are, but my history, as I remember it, at 65 was based on the fact that Social Security at the same time.
Although I think it's important to continue to exhaust all options here and continue to pursue and keep pushing hard, and I think staff's doing. To offset this budget shortfall, have you looked at any other options as far as generating the revenue shortfall? I mean, that to me too would be something to consider.
We're very.
I mean, instead of just, obviously you got to focus on this issue, but at the same time, on the sidelines, it seems that you have to prepare yourself for what ultimately might come, and that would be trying to offset this shortfall with additional revenue. Is that a fair assessment, or am I missing?
We have we're very limited in what our options are under the current legislation we're in. But we have, for our Wildlife Foundation, for instance, we've been working now for the last 2 or 3 years to come up with a funding mechanism for advertising through wildlife programs. And I think former Commissioner Schuster could probably go into more detail on that, but without taking up the time right now, just to tell you that if that comes into being, and based on the numbers that we have seen that might happen, that would be a really good way to offset that. It actually, depending on the numbers that we have seen, it would offset that.
I'm just looking for a plan B, you know, and I mean, because
that's our first plan B. And if I can fast forward here for a second into the other section, Madam Chairman, my last thing to throw out somewhat along this same line is that there are a number of people who benefit from wildlife programs. I mean, some people benefit just by the fact that they know that it's there. It's just something that they are glad that we've taken eagles off of the endangered species list and other species have been restored. So even though they don't view wildlife, they don't really participate, they're glad that that's there. There's other people who do the viewing, they do all the other things that are actually participating in some type of wildlife. But there is a direct benefit that a lot of people get in our strategic plan that's out for review right now. We actually have a section in there that talks about accommodating other uses on wildlife management areas or on TWRA controlled lands that aren't associated with hunting and fishing. We have done that somewhat over the years, never really looked at it that formally, but that is a part of this whole formal process. One of the things that we're trying to do is to be able to do that without impacting the real reason of why you have wildlife management areas, and that's not only hunting and fishing, but for literally managing wildlife. So trying to meld those together. There are some people that I mentioned earlier who pay for that privilege to do those things, and some who do not. And at some point, we have got to look at a way to generate some revenue that right now we get in trouble with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service if we address in terms of, for instance, we talked about a minute ago, horseback riding. There's also hiking and camping, all those kind of things. And I'm not talking about horseback riding in terms of field trials. That's a whole nother story. I'm talking about just recreational horseback riding, recreational camping, recreational hiking, all those things that go on. When we have to go in and do any kind of maintenance, any kind of repairs, we cannot use license dollars to do that, as it puts us in a diversion of funds situation, which the Fish and Wildlife Service will ding us for. So we've got to find some way to fund those programs if we're going to allow those programs to go forward. And I think under the present feeling of the citizens of Tennessee and pretty much throughout the nation, we have become the largest landowner in Tennessee. TWRA owns more land than any other state agency. And to do that, there's going to be an automatic push and wish to utilize those lands when they can, and there's really nothing wrong with that as long as it doesn't interfere with our primary purpose. But at some point, we've got to figure out some way to make those programs a part of what we're doing, whether it's on access to rivers and waterways or boat ramps or all those other activities I just mentioned. I don't have a solution for you. I'm just telling you other states have addressed that, and there's multiple ways that they have done it. That's another thing that we're going to have to look at, as you say, to make up some of the shortfall or to go forward to be able to implement those programs that we're being asked to put forward.
One last question. What out of state, just on this hypothetically, out of state guide fee being implemented help? Would that be enough revenue, or would that be significant enough dollars to actually to justify that?
Not in itself, but it's kind of like anything else.
Could those monies be used for operating cost?
I would think that's not a license per se, is it?
I don't know. I just throwing that out there.
If it allows them 200 fish, it would be a license. If it just allows them, if it's like a business license, then no, we wouldn't be able to count it.
So in any case, it's cumulatively, if you do several things, it does make a big difference. Individually, it may not be enough to get us out of where we are.
Thank you for entertaining my question.
Madam Chairman, that's all I really had to mention. I want to bring up those 3 points.
And I think that we have Commissioner Cannon, if I can say that in one sentence, had a comment.
And what I'm hearing is we've got a two-pronged problem. Number one is looking ahead. Fish and Wildlife has made it very clear about how they're going to count license with respect to the revenues that we get from the feds. That's looking ahead. Right now, we've got a matter of fairness, and so far we've been trumped, if you will, as far as I think you said it best, the grandfathering of licenses that have already been sold. I do agree with Commissioner Woodson that we need to exhaust all avenues, and I know you're doing that, and it's greatly appreciated. One question along those lines: is there a legal appeal to their decision not to grandfather the past practice? I know looking ahead is going to be different, but is there a legal appeal avenue under the worst case scenario? I don't wish that on us or anybody else, but $2 million is a serious matter.
These are not the legal words. Barry, help me out here, but essentially, when you agree to accept federal aid, you essentially say, I agree to abide by whatever rules Fish and Wildlife Service put forward.
So there's no appeals process to that?
None other than the ones we're already exploring. I don't know if there's a legal issue that you could bring that would enter into getting that money back unless they agreed that as they prepared their rules that maybe they didn't put enough forethought into it. And I'll be honest, I'm not really sure if the Inspector General or Office of Management Budget was behind a lot of the reason that the Fish and Wildlife Service have changed. They haven't spelled that out to me, at least, if that's true. But that may be another avenue that we're going to have to look, and if we do, that will be congressional talk outside the Fish and Wildlife Service.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Director Carter, times are changing. And, we set this senior license up with the pretense that we were going to do about what I think I was told 7.5% of interest on our license, and that's what made it feasible. Now we're down to less than 1%, or is it half of 1%, or
Less than 1/4 of 1%.
1/4 of 1%? So, things are changing and things aren't working out. So I just feel like this commission and the agency, we're gonna have to be proactive. We have a situation where, and when I came on the commission, I firmly believed that my sole responsibility was to be a representative of the hunting and fishing license holders of this state. But we've got so many other people now that are using our resources that are willing to contribute. And that may be where we get our, make up for our budget shortfall. And the figures I read, we have birders that spend almost $1.9 billion. Is that correct? And I just think that the time is right, that we need to get our head out of the sand, and we're going to have to encompass these people that are using our WMAs. We need a WMA, stamp or license or whatever for all the users that are using. People need to start, if they're going to, the license dollars for hunting and fishing have paid for everything. We can't do it anymore. It's obvious. We're going to have to do it. And I'm challenging the agency to come back with some, at least some suggestions, either if not for the February meeting, for the March meeting, and let's go ahead and get this thing rolling and determine what we're going to need to do. We can't control the federal government, but that's obvious, but we can control what we do in this state. And if we're going to keep offering WMAs and we're going to be repairing them from the destruction from hikers and horseback riders and all the people, they're using them now, and we need to do something to go ahead and do it. It's just like I've said it several times. State of Virginia 2 years ago, if you buy the same license that you do if you're a hunter, or you can buy a hunting license, or you can buy a wildlife management permit that's the same dollar amount as the hunting license. We need to be proactive. Things are changing, and the people that are using our WMAs are changing, and I just think we need to look at it in the boating with the canoe, the kayaks, everything. I just think we've talked about it. I just think that we can't be so scared to step on toes if that's what it's going to take to keep offering the service we do for this agency. Does anybody else have any comments on that?
Amen.
Well, at what point, I don't think we're going to infuriate the legislators if we start just looking at ways that other states are using to pay for our WMAs and for our waterways and police protection, the whole thing. And I just, I don't know at what point that we want to just say, this is where we are, this is what we're going to have to go. Maybe we need to get rid of our lifetime license. If we've got $32 or $3 million that we can't touch, why we're going in the hole. I just think we've got to go ahead and bite the bullet, and let's start looking at these difficult decisions, and let's make some decisions and keep this agency sound financially.
I think you do have to look at the all-encompassing look at the whole thing. Every one of the things that we already do and those things we aren't doing yet. There are 3 different groups that I know of in Tennessee that are looking at alternative funding for not just wildlife, but for natural resources in general. We're a part of those discussions. So that's all ongoing, but it's certainly not going to take place in the next year or two.
We're going to have to be proactive and realize that whether we like it or not, we're going to start representing more than just the licensed dollars of our hunter and fishermen. We've got all of the other outdoor activities that are using our public property that we own. I just think that, of course, y'all know I've been beating the bush about banging the drum about guides and license, that sort of thing. And I'm not trying to, force the issue. I don't have an agenda. I'm just saying we do need to get out of. I think that the current federal political climate is such that, Commissioner Stroud and I talked about it, our lives are changing, and they're forcing the issue. And, they're the ones that are saying now we're not going to recognize, the senior license dollars. So we're beginning to lose money. We're going to have to be very proactive so that we don't get in trouble. And I just want us to be very cognizant of the fact that we've got to be aggressive and start looking at the people that have been using our facilities and what we can do to help them start contributing financially.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We have Commissioner Cannon, Cox. Any other comments from Commission? And I know we have a member of the public, at least one, who wants to make a comment, but we'll certainly give that time. Commissioner Cannon?
I agree wholeheartedly. As we step into those waters, then I would challenge myself and maybe us as a commission. And it just began. What you just said was a beginning point. We've got to let the public know what's going on. We got to give them a chance to have input into this. This is a significant change. And it's a good, it will be, whatever it ends up being will be good. But I just want to make sure that in the midst of this, we've included ample opportunity for the public to participate and hear why we're doing what we're doing. And if that takes some workshops across the state, so be it. And as Ed, you said it best a minute ago, when we've gotten in these waters before, the people who use these resources have always stepped up. Once they understood what the problem was, they've stepped up and says, do what you need to do on the licenses. And they will again. I have all the confidence in that in the world. We owe it to them to let them know why we're going through this right now. And Mr. Chairman, what you just said began that process.
Commissioner Cox is yielding his time, and so unless there are other comments from members of the commission, I welcome members of the public. If they'd like to comment, please come. Yes, sir, if you'd give us your...
I'm loud enough that everybody be able to hear me.
Yes, sir. We do have this streamed, and so it's being recorded.
All right, excellent. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to speak. My name is Scott Banbury. I'm the Conservation Chair of the Tennessee chapter of the Sierra Club. And I think this is a very pertinent issue. I have done my part. I bought watchable wildlife license plates. My wife buys a hunting license every year. She never gets a deer, but and we generally keep fishing licenses as part of our outdoor activities with the Sierra Club. But the vast majority of our membership is probably not doing that. And I don't see any reason why our membership wouldn't want to contribute on a regular annual basis to the ongoing preservation, protection, enhancement of TWR's wildlife management areas. Ed well knows that we are totally opposed to the idea that the agency should ever be put in a position where they start to look at, say, mineral development as a way of funding ongoing operations of the agency. And so I would like to offer myself, not only here in Tennessee, but also regionally, because I work with the legislative directors in all of the states that were mentioned by the director. I think this is a real, maybe it's time that we can take that step and start getting some of these people that haven't been paying regularly into the system to start paying into it, and that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. Any other members of the public, please join us.
Hello, my name is Nick Kraft, and I didn't intend to speak, but some of it hit pretty close to home. When they first developed the senior lifetime license, well, first I should tell you I bought 9 lifetime licenses. The last one I bought was my own. But when they first developed the senior lifetime license, my dad was already over 65, so he was exempt. But that was the first lifetime license I bought was for my dad. I bought some for my nephews and others. I also have bought with the $10 when I came to realize that the federal cost share or the federal Pittman-Robertson money was going to follow that license. I went out and bought one for my boss, who never wetted a line in his life. I bought for my mom, for my aunt. I bought lifetime licenses for those folks, and so some of those never did get used, but the funds were coming in. I hope that the other states, it sounds to me like the federal government, maybe without much authority, is trimming this, and I'm worried that the lifetime license that the 45-year-old buys in a couple of years, it's not going to count. So I would encourage not just the states that have a senior license, but that maybe we should be working with states that have any kind of lifetime license to come on and see where this thing is. I've learned something today that is worrisome to me. So other states might want to look at this and see where it's headed, because a lifetime license for a 45-year-old sounds like might end up in the same hands, same fate. So get with the other states, hopefully. Thank you.
Madam Chair, if I may,
Yes, sir.
to that point,
Thank you. Yes, sir.
we made that exact argument. Because we were one of the first states to be audited, again, because I was able to sit on the executive committee, I brought that up at our executive committee meeting. In the states that have permanent there are many more that have permanent licenses than permanent senior licenses. And so everybody's on notice and everybody's paying attention. So, anyway, point taken.
Thank you. Any other comments from the public? If not, then I will make a motion to direct Director Carter and through his leadership, Chris Richardson, to pursue legislative resolution action to at least assist on this issue. It sounds like we've got a much broader budget conversation, to Chairman McMillan's point, and to the broader conversation, but I think certainly to exhaust and inform and educate policymakers and the public. This can provide a very good opportunity to make sure that there's an awareness about these important federal changes, and perhaps a remedy on this issue, although I don't think that will solve all of the revenue issues, but perhaps this one issue, and so I would make that motion.
Second.
Is there any discussion? Again, any from the public? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. You adopt. And Director Carter, I would assume that you'll be working with Chairman McMillan to whatever, and Chris, of course, to make sure whatever language is reflective and most appropriate for the process. But I appreciate your diligence in this effort very much.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Great. And I believe that's all we have, Mr. Chairman.
All right, thank you, Commissioner Woodson. At this time, we'll move to the Audit Committee. Chairman Bill Cox, please.